Mark took another sip and, putting the mug on the edge of the table, checked the cooler mount on the motherboard with a habitual movement. He always did this check even when there was no need. His hands were confident, fast, with barely noticeable traces of old cuts from sharp aluminum covers and edges of cases. He loved the objective, clear movement of thought, from screw to screw, from function to function. When everything is laid out on the shelves, the world becomes more bearable. Sarah, on the other hand, started with a general with pictures and numbers, with how the pieces of their everyday life fit together in a table. She kept tables for almost everything: expenses, income, contacts/follow-ups, tasks, deadlines. Her neat handwriting in a notebook was a continuation of this habit, even lines, clear markers, arrows to deadlines. And she was not at all dry. She knew how to laugh at her schedules. She could put a little smiley face next to the item, pay for hosting, as if encouraging them both. "What's up with the tests, Mr. Perfectionist?" she asked, flipping through the pages. In the margins, next to the prototype section, there was a date and a note. "Ask Mark about logs." "I flooded the system with artificial load," he chuckled. "It survived. Almost. There's a bottleneck in the queue handler." Almost is a word from the list of alarming words. Sarah noted and nodded at the stand with the router and the mess of wires. Somewhere in there our nightly surprises are hiding. Mark smiled at her careful anxiety. Sarah had always been a risk-taker. Since she was a child, she grew up in a family where the family budget notebook lay in the top drawer of the dresser and was updated every Sunday like a prayer book. Her father, an electrician, her mother, a nurse, taught her that money was not frivolous. In college, Sarah worked part-time in a library, and payment discipline became almost an aesthetic for her. She liked how the columns met, how the ends met. Perhaps this was her secret romance, finding even amounts in chaos. Mark was different. He is one of those kids who take remote controls apart and put them back together, and sometimes don't. At 12, he restored his neighbor's old laptop purely for the fun of it on the fourth try. At school, he was lucky with his computer science teacher. She gave him a flash drive with the source codes of other people's projects and said, "Look, touch, break." Since then, Mark respected the right of things to break and his duty to fix them. He memorized the paths in the code almost bodily, like a mechanic memorizes the arrangement of the bones of keys in the palm of his hand. "A bottleneck, you say?" Sarah said, picking up a stray strand of hair and looking at the board by the wall, covered in colorful stickers. "Tell me it's beautiful. Then at least it's aesthetic." "Not really, but we'll fix it," Mark shrugged. "Look." He turned the monitor toward her. Log lines were flashing in the dark window, next to a window with a load graph that seemed to be holding on by its last strength, like an arrow on the dashboard of an old pickup. Sarah leaned over, resting her palm on the table. There was a thin strip of machine grease on her fingers. She wasn't afraid of dirt, and she wasn't afraid to learn. She already recognized familiar words in the terminal, knew where to look, what to ask. Her questions were always to the point. What about error handling? Will we scare the user away with a strange message? Remember how you yourself complained about an unforeseen exception without a back button. "I'm already adding friendliness." Mark grinned and, typing quickly, added, "There will be a simpler message and a repeat option." Each of them had little rituals. Mark, before making a commitment, always stared out the window for 2 minutes in silence, as if checking his internal compass. Before calling an investor or a potential partner, Sarah would always go through 3 points with her eyes: the goal, the boundaries, how we can be useful. They suffered through these habits in little things, in evenings that were similar to each other. Pizza from a box on the lid of the server, calls after 9 so as not to distract busy people, a string on a keychain so it wouldn't get lost in the garage, and coffee mugs that had various cracks. Marquina's burned her finger at the handle, Serena's chipped slightly at the edge, and he kept promising to buy new ones, but forgot. "By the way, you've got the logo a pixel off here," Sarah said, noticing a barely noticeable skew on the prototype. And I fell out. "A harsh audit," Mark said jokingly, indignantly, obediently correcting. Okay, I got the pixel back. Is life better now? An inch, she nodded. That's enough sometimes. A muffled sound of a passing car came from the street. The neighbor's dog barked and immediately fell silent. He recognized their voices and got used to them. To the left of the gate hung an old cork board on which, in addition to checklists, other people's tiny lives were pinned. The business card of the auto mechanic, Tom, a sheet of paper with a schedule of local meetups, a ticket from the cinema where they went 3 months ago to walk their brains. Between the notes, a photo taken on a phone. Both in the same mugs, the same smiles, only the light was daylight. They sometimes argued whether all this was necessary at all, whether deferred comfort does not bring disdain for the present. The arguments were rarely loud. They had enough strings of stubbornness, but the tone always remained careful. Mark, closing his laptop for a second, just to feel the silence, remembered how he had initially explained his code to Sarah on napkins. They had been deciding whether their savings would last 3 months and what to do if they couldn't make it. He spoke quickly, haltingly, but his eyes were shining. Sarah handed him a pen, asked simple questions that made the scheme clear. In essence, she had taught him to speak about complex things simply, first for her, then for everyone. How do we talk to Mr. Rogers? Mark asked. Is he the type who likes numbers or stories? Looks like he's the kind of guy who listens and watches us listen back, Sarah said. I'll text him tomorrow morning and suggest a quick call and a meeting at their office. But first, she tapped her notepad, security sections, monetization plan, simple user scenario for 3 minutes, so that no one questions gets crowded. How do you keep all this in your head? Mark asked sincerely. I'm good at code, and you're bad at everything else. Because in all other respects, they are understandable people, Sarah smiled. And because we have bills coming up, she added dryly, without drama. It was not a reproach, more like a reminder of the ground beneath their feet, their common anchor. They started getting ready. This was also a ritual for them. Mark hid the screwdrivers in a box by size, short to short, long to long. He turned off in order, the soldering iron, the lamp, the fan on the floor. Sarah folded the cables, winding them into neat eights, checked that the paper in the printer was loaded for tomorrow, wiped the table with a damp cloth. Her movements were a little tired, but precise, like those of a person who had learned a dance. I'll still make an appointment with the dentist tomorrow, she said suddenly, glancing at the calendar by the refrigerator, where a sheet of paper with appointments hung under a magnet reading San Francisco. You're grinding your teeth again when you're nervous. I'm not nervous, Mark responded automatically and then grinned. Okay, I'm nervous. Write it down. Their family looked exactly like that from Cares said casually from small observations. Sarah noticed his teeth grinding, Mark that she forgot to eat, and went out for a burrito. There were quarrels about the increasing time spent on non-priority things, about which of them was holding the whole house today, but these arguments were short because both knew the goal is the same, not to hang on to the partner, not to lose respect for his way of life. Sarah closed the notebook, but didn't put it in her backpack right away. She ran her fingers over the cover, like a cat's back. Mark, she said, a little quieter than before. I like what we're becoming. Not will be, but are becoming now. You're more patient. I'm bolder. He nodded without further ado. Those words were enough here. They walked out to the garage door together. Mark automatically checked the handle, moved his shoulder to get it to fit, and placed his palm on the cold metal. Sarah waited for the familiar click of the lock to signify the day was over. The smell of warm wood exhaled in the sun during the day, dry grass, and someone's dinner from the neighboring window filled the air. The crickets had gathered in a circle, and the silence became quieter because of it. On the porch of their small house stood an old aluminum stepladder, another silent sign that something was being fixed. 2 towels were drying on the railing, one with a stripe, one without. In the hallway behind the door, a stack of books awaited them. Marketing fundamentals, designing data-intensive applications, taxes for small businesses, their self-study class, which they laughingly called Evening University. Mark turned the key. The light in the garage went out, or rather, he switched the lamp to afterlife mode. The fan hummed for a minute, finishing its job. Sarah took her husband's arm, but before she stepped toward the car, she glanced back at the dark rectangle of the gate, the way one glances at an open book when someone calls for dinner. "There will be a new list tomorrow," she said. There was no pathos in her voice, only calm readiness. "And we will go through it again." On one point, Mark confirmed. They walked down the path to the car, unhurriedly, like people who had learned to watch their pace. Sarah's 5-day workweek, Mark's 15 tabs in his browser, the neighbor's dog who had stopped barking and lay down on his rug. There was a lot of simplicity in their lives. Perhaps it was this simplicity that made everything else bearable. And in this simplicity they were themselves, two adults with enough tenderness to argue and enough stubbornness to continue. The next week was a frantic preparation. Mark slept for hours a night, refining the prototype, finding and fixing bugs, polishing every detail before his meeting with Mr. Rogers. Sarah was not far behind. She put together an impressive presentation, calculated financial projections, and thought through answers to possible investor questions. They both knew that this was an opportunity they couldn't miss. On the appointed day, Mark and Sarah arrived in downtown San Francisco, where the venture fund's office was located. The tall glass building in the business district seemed like a palace compared to their modest garage. Having climbed to the right floor, the couple found themselves in a spacious conference room with panoramic windows overlooking the bay. Mark's throat was dry with excitement, but Sarah stood confidently next to him, lightly touching his hand under the table in support. Mr. Rogers turned out to be a short, energetic man of about 50, with a piercing gaze. He was accompanied by a young assistant with a laptop. After greeting them, Rogers immediately got down to business. "So, Mark, Sarah, tell me what your project is." "I like the brief. I'm waiting for the details." Mark nodded, launched the presentation on the screen, and began to tell his story. He spoke with enthusiasm, forgetting about his previous fears. When the conversation turned to his idea, passion awakened in him. He showed slides, demonstrated a working prototype. Sarah supplemented his story, cited figures, audience growth, profit forecasts, competitor analysis. They acted as a well-coordinated team, gradually seeing that Rogers was becoming more and more interested. Half an hour into the presentation, Mr. Rogers raised his hand, stopping the flow of information. For a moment, Mark tensed. Was something wrong? But the investor was smiling. "I must admit, I'm impressed," Rogers said, leaning back in his chair. "Excellent work. It's clear you're passionate about your work. The project has potential. I think we could discuss the terms of investment." Mark felt his heart jump into his throat. Sarah squeezed his hand slightly. The next half hour was spent discussing details. Rogers talked about the amount of investment and the share the fund would like to receive, and asked about development plans. Sarah confidently answered financial questions, Mark technical. In the end, they shook hands. The fund would invest $500,000 in their startup in exchange for 20% of the company. Mark felt like he was in a dream as he walked out of the foundation building. $500,000. That was a lot of money for them. He and Sarah walked to the parapet next to the parking lot, overlooking the downtown business district. "We did it," Mark said quietly, looking ahead at the sun-drenched streets. Next to him, Sarah laughed and threw her arms around his neck, literally hanging on his shoulders with joy. "Yes, we did it, Mark." He picked her up in his arms and spun her around. People on the sidewalk turned around in surprise at the couple celebrating in broad daylight, but Mark didn't care. He was happy. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, putting Sarah down on the ground, but still holding her by the waist. "What?" she responded, smiling brightly. "That you can finally quit your job and join me full-time," Mark said. "No more reporting to someone else's boss. You're my CFO from today." Sarah pulled back a little, peering into his face. "Are you sure? The money is only in the startup account for now. There's a lot of work ahead. What if something goes wrong?" Mark shook his head. "You said to yourself that you believe in us. I can't do it without you." And isn't this what we dreamed of, working together on our brainchild? She smiled, softer this time, tenderly. Yes, that's exactly it. He saw pride and love in her eyes. And yet there was something else there, perhaps a hint of excitement about the next step. But Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I agree. To hell with them, with the reports. She waved her hand cheerfully. I'll babysit our startup full-time. Mark laughed. He liked it when she said that our startup, their common brainchild. He leaned over and kissed her, no longer holding back, forgetting about the passers-by. Hooray! He almost shouted when they broke away from each other. This needs to be celebrated. You're right, Sarah chimed in. Let's not work today, let's just celebrate properly. They drove home, stopping at the supermarket on the way, buying some goodies and a bottle of champagne. Their rented apartment didn't have luxury furniture or designer renovations yet, but the atmosphere that evening was festive. Sarah cooked seafood pasta, a dish they associated with special occasions. Mark opened the champagne, catching the cork flying up to the ceiling. They laughed and chatted non-stop at the kitchen table. Can you imagine? Sarah said, gesturing with her fork. Now we'll have a normal office. Not a garage with spiders, but a real bright office. I even feel a little sorry for that garage, but we're growing. The garage isn't going anywhere, Mark smiled, pouring her more champagne. We'll always remember where we started. Later that evening, they sat on the living room floor, plans scattered around them. The champagne was nearly finished. Sarah was leafing through a catalog of office furniture that could be ordered. Mark was leafing through a list of job openings, making a plan for hiring his first employees. Music was playing softly on the radio. You know, Sarah said suddenly dreamily, someday, if everything works out, I'd like a little house by the ocean, so that I could spend time by the water on weekends, walk along the beach, get away from all this hustle and bustle. Mark put his arm around her shoulders, looking at the furniture sketches in front of them. Of course, since we've started dreaming, I probably wouldn't mind a sports car. Remember how I always dreamed about a Mustang Shelby? Sarah snorted. Of course I would forget. Your Mustang poster was hanging in the dorm until it faded. They laughed, and Mark clinked his glass with her. Here's to a Mustang and a house by the ocean. Someday we'll have that, I'm sure. Sarah looked at him, slightly bowing her head. You know, I'm happy, right now. Not because we have money. I'm just happy that we're together, that we've achieved something. It's scary to remember, but it could have not worked out. Mark nodded. Yes, but you always believed. Even when I began to doubt myself, you did not let me lose heart. She touched his cheek softly. Because I love you, and I believe in you. They fell silent, looking at each other with understanding. Somewhere outside the window, a passing car honked. A dog barked in the apartment across the street. The world lived its own life, but for them at that moment, there were only the two of them and their great hopes. The initial success inspired them. In the coming months, events developed rapidly. With the money they had invested, they rented a small office and hired a dozen employees, young, energetic, ready to work day and night, inspired by the example of the founders. The project grew. The first versions of the product attracted more and more users. Mark dove headlong into managing the development. Sarah had to master the role of financial director and office manager. She dealt with all organizational issues, from hiring accountants to buying coffee for the office. There was no surplus of money yet. Most of the investment funds went into development, and the profit was small. The couple paid themselves a modest salary, which was enough to cover expenses. They still lived quite modestly. But this did not bother them. They knew what they were trying for. By the end of the year, their startup had made its first profit. Small, but stable. And a year later, real success struck. A large technology company became interested in their development and offered to collaborate. The number of users exceeded 1 million. The company's name, the same one that was born on a piece of paper in their garage, began to appear in specialized publications. Journalists interviewed Mark, calling him one of the most promising young founders of the year. Sarah also got into the camera's lens. A couple of times journalists were interested in the story of a married couple who managed to build a business from scratch together. One evening, returning home after another long day at work, Mark and Sarah caught themselves smiling. All the difficulties, sleepless nights, and risks were not in vain. The company was growing stronger, and although it still had a long way to go to reach multi-million-dollar status, they already felt the taste of victory. On the threshold of the apartment, Mark suddenly picked up his wife in his arms like on the wedding day and spun her around. Sarah shuddered in surprise, but then burst into loud laughter. "Hey, be careful," she cried, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Mrs. CEO," Mark said with a smile, pulling her to her feet in the hallway, "let me congratulate you. Your husband has been officially recognized by the city newspaper as one of the most promising entrepreneurs of the year." Sarah shrugged coquettishly. "Oh yeah, so what? He's a celebrity now? I hope he's not in danger of becoming a celebrity." Mark rolled his eyes as he entered the game. "Oh, I've had my taste of fame. Now I'm going to need a personal assistant, a driver, and a limo." Sarah gave him a light slap on the shoulder. "Stop fooling around. You'd better check your mail for an invitation to the evening. It's the mayor's reception for innovative companies, remember? We were invited." Mark snapped his fingers. "Right, I forgot. You wanted to go, right?" Sarah nodded, taking off her shoes. "Of course. It's an opportunity to make useful contacts, to show off. And it's just nice we're recognized, invited into society." Mark winced a little. After a day of work, he wanted to stay home more, but he didn't argue. He knew Sarah loved these kinds of events. Besides, she was right, connections are never a bad thing. "Okay," he agreed. "Then let's get changed and go." An hour later, they were standing at the entrance to the City Exhibition Center, where the reception was taking place. Mark felt a little out of place. He rarely attended social events. His suit slightly restricted his movements, and his tie seemed like a noose around his neck. But Sarah was shining next to him. She was wearing an elegant dark blue dress that emphasized her figure, her hair was styled, and she had light lipstick on her lips. She looked both solemn and fresh. They walked into the hall, arm in arm. There were people everywhere, representatives of other startups, investors, government officials. The mayor of the city was giving a speech from the stage, praising the innovative spirit. Mark was listening with half an ear, while Sarah seemed to be absorbing every word. After the official party, the socializing began over cocktails. People came up to the couple to introduce themselves, asked about their company. Mark, although tired, answered everyone politely. Sarah was surprisingly active. She easily entered into a conversation with one person after another, laughed at jokes, talked about the startup. Some time later, Mark went to the drinks table to catch his breath. He noticed Sarah chatting with a tall, dark-haired man in an expensive suit. The man was telling her something enthusiastically, and she leaned forward, listening. Mark felt a slight twinge of jealousy, or rather, anxiety. However, as he came closer, he heard a snippet of conversation. The conversation was about investing in real estate on the coast. Sarah was listening, asking questions. It was clear that she was interested in the topic. The drive home that night marked the end of another stage. Sarah animatedly discussed what she had heard at the reception, mentioned who she had met. Mark nodded, looking out the window at the city lights at night. He was as happy with their successes as she was, but he clearly felt that their life was becoming more complex and varied. If before everything came down to work and a short rest at home, now new components appeared: social meetings, connections, a social life. He did not mind, but sometimes he caught himself thinking that he missed those quiet evenings in the garage. A few more years passed. Mark and Sarah's company had moved beyond the startup stage and into a sustainable business. After several successful investment rounds and partnerships, its estimated value reached tens of millions of dollars. The couple's life changed significantly. From a cramped rented apartment, they moved first to a spacious loft closer to the office, and then to their own house in one of the prestigious areas of San Francisco with a view of the ocean. Mark fulfilled one of his long-standing promises. He bought a sports car. True, Not the Mustang Shelby he dreamed of in his youth, but a new model electric car, more practical for the city. Sarah did not stay on the sidelines either. She happily furnished the new house, choosing designer furniture and modern appliances, turning the home into a model of style from a magazine. They finally had the comfort they had dreamed of for so many years: a spacious kitchen with a marble countertop, a living room with panoramic windows, a cozy garden in the backyard where they had barbecues on weekends. It seemed that everything they dreamed of while working nights in the garage had come true. But along with success came new realities. Mark, as CEO, now bore enormous responsibility. The company's staff had grown to 100 people, and every day required solving dozens of issues. Sometimes he nostalgically recalled the times when he could sit all day at the code. Now his time was consumed by meetings with investors, boards of directors, strategic planning. Sarah, having officially taken the post of CFO, at first tried to keep up with everything, supervising the accounting, communicating with new shareholders, monitoring the budget. But gradually she handed over operational tasks to a professional team that was hired in her place, leaving for herself mainly issues of strategy and investor relations. Sarah channeled her free time into another direction. She immersed herself in social life. As the wife of a successful entrepreneur and co-owner of a company, she increasingly received invitations to various events: charity balls, receptions to mark the opening of exhibitions, dinners at clubs for the wives of businessmen. At first, she dragged Mark along, convincing him that it was good for their image. Mark tried to accompany her, but he could not always get away from work. Over time, Sarah began to go alone or with a friend. She also made new friends. Their social circle expanded. If before they mostly saw old college friends, and even then rarely because of their busy schedules, now Sarah moved among the wives and girlfriends of other entrepreneurs, officials, artists. She got a taste for social life. Her photo was published in the local chronicle a couple of times, either at the opening of an art gallery or at a fashion show. She was flattered, and it was new. Mark watched these changes with interest and some concern. He was glad that his wife could finally afford some rest and entertainment after years of hard work. Sarah seemed to blossom. She had swapped her strict office suits for stylish designer dresses, had her hair done at an expensive salon, and was doing pilates with a personal trainer. Next to her, surrounded by the luxurious interior of their new home, Mark sometimes felt like the same guy from the garage who didn't quite fit into all this gloss. One day, returning home late, Mark found Sarah in the living room with her two new friends, Emily and Catherine, the wives of famous businessmen. There was an unfinished bottle of expensive wine on the table, and the girlfriends were laughing loudly. Mark politely greeted them and joined in for a few minutes, feeling uncomfortable. The conversation was about social news, far from his concerns. The women were cheerfully joking about Sarah, letting her workaholic go from work. Mark smiled tiredly, hiding his irritation. Soon the guests began to pack up, and Sarah kissed them and walked them to the door. When they left, the house was plunged into a tense silence. Mark sank tiredly onto the sofa. Sarah began to collect the empty glasses from the table, placing them on a tray. "Sorry, I didn't warn you," she said quietly. "We met at a charity breakfast, and they asked to join me for a glass of wine." "It's all right," Mark responded, loosening his tie. "It's good that you're having fun. I just didn't expect to see so many people at our house." Sarah looked at him questioningly, worry flickering in her eyes. "Does it bother you?" Mark rubbed the bridge of his nose. "No, I'm just tired and probably a little out of your conversation. Don't pay attention." He stood up and headed to the kitchen, poured out the rest of the wine from his glass, and automatically checked his phone. He heard a sigh behind him. "Mark," the woman called. He turned around. Sarah was standing with her arms crossed over her chest. "We haven't spent time together for a long time, outside of work. You're always busy, you come home late, tired. I understand business, responsibility, but sometimes I miss you." There was no resentment in her voice, but rather sadness. Mark felt a pang of conscience. After all, she was right. In the last couple of years, their lives had become filled with a lot of things: but their personal time for each other had decreased. Previously, they fought side by side, but now they often acted separately, each with their own responsibilities. He walked back into the living room and put his arm around Sarah, pulling her close. "I'm sorry, I really am. It's just that work is going through a tough time right now, and he trailed off, searching for words. "I know you get lonely sometimes. Want to have a night out tomorrow just for us? I'll cancel everything and we'll go somewhere." Sarah relaxed in his arms, but her answer was hesitant. "Let's try." The next day, Mark kept his promise. He left the office early and drove Sarah to her favorite restaurant on the waterfront. They sat on the veranda overlooking the ocean, ordering oysters and white wine. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting the sky crimson. Everything seemed as before. They were talking, laughing. Mark was telling funny stories from the office, Sarah the latest social news. But as the pause dragged on, in the ensuing silence, both felt something had subtly changed between them. After dinner, they walked along the beach, trying to keep the conversation light. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, Mark held her hand. But deep down, he felt uneasy, as if a shadow had spread between them, one that would grow if left unchecked. Back home, Sarah seemed to be in a better mood. She thanked Mark for the evening and was herself again, a tender and loving wife. They spent the night together, indulging in a passion that had been fading under the weight of fatigue and routine. Mark fell asleep with the thought that everything would work out. He just needed to break away from the whirlwind of things more often and devote time to his family. Sarah was nearby. She still loved him, he felt it. Yes, she was carried away by her new life, acquaintances, and the spotlight, but this was a normal reaction to their new status. "I just need to be more attentive to her," he decided, falling asleep. But time was running out. As soon as Mark was plunged into another round of business, his plan to spend more time with his wife was again shattered. A couple of weeks after their romantic dinner, he was again sitting up until the night, preparing for an important presentation to the board of directors. Meanwhile, Sarah was not sitting at home either. Her calendar had a season of events and charity evenings. They again became like ships, meeting in the night only to part ways by morning. One such day, Mark stayed late at the office. A bug in a product update forced the entire programming team to work until nightfall. He returned home after midnight, exhausted. The house was dark and quiet. As he went upstairs, he noticed a strip of light under the bedroom door. Opening it slightly, he saw that Sarah was asleep, without turning off the night light. She was still wearing a dress and makeup, as if she had just returned and had not had time to change, falling asleep from exhaustion just like that. Mark walked in quietly. On the chair next to the bed lay a silk scarf. Smelling of someone else's perfume, apparently someone had hugged Sarah when they met, he noted automatically. Next to her stood an expensive handbag, from which the program of the event peeked out. Mark ran his eyes over the title, Annual Ball of the Foundation for the Advancement of the Arts. He had forgotten that she was going there today. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his sleeping wife. In the flickering light of the nightlight, her face looked tired. Mark felt a surge of tenderness and pity. They had both driven themselves to exhaustion. He wanted to wake her, tell her about his experiences, and listen to her. But now Sarah looked so defenseless that he did not dare disturb her sleep. Mark carefully removed her high-heeled shoes from her feet and carefully covered her with a blanket. Sarah muttered something in her sleep and turned over on her side, continuing to sleep. Mark turned off the nightlight, kissed her on the cheek, and left, quietly closing the door. That night he tossed and turned for a long time. Lying on the couch downstairs, he decided not to wake Sarah with his arrival. His thoughts were confused. He could not shake the feeling that they were moving further and further away, and if he did not find a way to return to their former closeness, the consequences could be disastrous. Soon, the company was celebrating an important event, the 5th anniversary of its founding. Mark decided to throw an outdoor celebration for the employees. They rented a country club near San Francisco, with lawns for games, barbecue, and even a small dance floor in the open air. He believed that this would help unite the team, and he himself wanted to take a little break from the work routine together with his team. On a Saturday afternoon, several buses brought employees and their families to the party. Sunlight glinted off the surface of the pool, laughter filled the air, and children ran around on the grass. Mark, dressed in a casual shirt and jeans, walked among the crowd, bantering with the programmers, thanking everyone for their contributions. Sarah was nearby, greeting acquaintances, hugging the wives of top managers. She looked dazzling in a light summer dress and sunglasses. After the official part with speeches and toasts, the free program began. Some played volleyball, some grilled burgers, and a group of young employees settled down by the pool. Sarah, having drunk champagne with the directors' spouses, went for a walk around the club's territory. She liked such events. Here she felt at home among people who knew the value of their success. At the railing of the terrace, near the sun loungers by the pool, stood a young man with a bottle of water in his hand, talking animatedly with his colleagues. Tall, athletic, with an open smile, he caught Sarah's attention because she had not seen his face before. New? As if he felt her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met. The guy immediately broke into a friendly smile and, apologizing to his interlocutor, stepped toward Sarah. "Hello," he extended his hand, a little shyly. "You must be Sarah. I saw you in the photos in the office, where the company's history, and Mark mentioned you." "That's right," she took off her glasses, smiling. "And you must be new to the company. I admit, I don't have time to remember everyone the staff is growing." The guy nodded sheepishly. "Yeah, they hired me a couple of months ago in the marketing department. Alex. Alex Rodriguez." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Alex." Sarah shook his hand. "How are you enjoying it here? Are you getting used to it?" "Oh yes, the work is very interesting." Alex was clearly encouraged by her interest. "I just came from university, and what I learn here every day is priceless. Mark is a great leader, and the team is amazing." Sarah noted his sincerity and enthusiasm. Alex looked to be about 25, no more. She felt older next to him, although she was only 30. Nevertheless, the attention of a young, attractive man was flattering. "I'm glad to hear it. Mark really puts a lot into the team, values talented young people," she said. "Are you local?" They struck up a casual conversation. Alex explained that he was originally from San Diego, had attended Stanford, and was an avid surfer. Sarah shared a memory of how she and Mark had once tried surfing in Hawaii during a rare vacation, not very successfully, but fun. They both laughed. "If you want to try again, I can arrange a lesson sometime," Alex offered, smiling. "I'm pretty good at boarding." "It's tempting," Sarah chuckled. "I'm afraid it's difficult with our schedule, but I'll take the offer into account." From a distance, Mark's voice could be heard calling out to his wife. Sarah saw her husband waving to her from under the tent where the key staff had gathered, apparently wanting to introduce her to someone. She waved back. "Sorry, Alex, duty calls me," she said almost regretfully. "It was nice meeting you." Likewise, he quickly raised his glass of water. "Finally, let's drink. There's water here, if you need it." Sarah clinked her empty champagne glass, slightly confused. "What are we drinking?" "To your company with Mark," Alex blurted out without thinking. "It's truly inspiring. And to you, of course." Sarah felt a slight blush. She saluted with her empty glass and pretended to drink, although there had been nothing in it for a long time. Alex smiled even wider, getting the joke. After saying goodbye, Sarah headed towards Mark. On the way, she glanced back furtively. Alex was also watching her. Catching her gaze, he nodded amiably. Sarah responded in kind and only then noticed that she was smiling. It had been a long time since she had had the opportunity to chat so easily with a stranger, especially one so young and full of life. In the evening, when the party was coming to an end and the tired but happy employees were heading home, Mark and Sarah were among the last to check that everything was packed and that no one had been forgotten. Mark was in a great mood. The event had been a success. Everyone was having fun. "Tired?" Sarah asked when they finally got into the car. "A little, But it's a pleasant tiredness, he replied, starting the engine. How do you like the holiday? It worked out great, she said sincerely. I met some of your employees I hadn't met before. They were all so interesting, so talented. You picked a great team. Mark smiled. I tried. I'm glad you appreciated it. On the way home, Sarah suddenly remembered Alex. She wanted to mention him, but suddenly stopped herself. There was nothing to say, really just a conversation. However, for some reason she didn't want to tell Mark about this conversation. Perhaps because Alex had made too good an impression on her, and she didn't want her husband to make fun of it or attach importance to it. That night, lying in bed, Sarah caught herself thinking about Alex. She remembered his youthful smile, his eyes burning with interest. She involuntarily compared this look with Mark's. Recently, they increasingly showed fatigue. Nonsense, Sarah scolded herself. Alex is just a sweet boy, full of energy, as befits his age, and Mark is a grown man with all the attendant worries. Naturally, he is different. Sarah turned to her sleeping husband and touched his shoulder. Mark mumbled something in his sleep, without waking up. She suddenly felt a strange feeling, like distance. Earlier, at the beginning of their journey, they were on the same wavelength, burning with a common cause. Now their roles had diverged. Mark carried the burden of responsibility, and sometimes it was difficult for her to reach out to him under this burden. And now she was chatting so freely with a near stranger. It wasn't that she was missing something from Mark, Sarah convinced herself. It was just nice to feel this ease of communication again. No worries, no discussion of problems, no fatigue on their faces. She closed her eyes. The usual things awaited her tomorrow: a call with tax consultants, a meeting with the committee preparing the charity ball. A couple of days would pass, the impressions of today's party would be erased. Perhaps she would never cross paths with this Alex again. And thank God, probably. However, fate decreed otherwise. A week later, during one of her trips to the office, when Sarah was discussing the details of a new bonus program for employees with the head of HR, the office door opened slightly and Alex Rodriguez looked inside. "Oh, sorry," he said, realizing that Sarah was there with the manager. "I'll come back later." "Everything is fine, Alex. Come in," the HR director responded. "We're just finishing up." Alex walked in holding a folder of documents. Sarah watched him out of the corner of her eye as she signed the last of the papers. He looked a little nervous when he noticed her. The HR director left after finishing the conversation, leaving them alone. "I'm glad to see you," Alex said too formally, as if he were still at a corporate party. "I didn't expect to meet you today." Sarah smiled and stood up from the table, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I drop by sometimes, before they write me off completely," she joked. "How's work?" Alex smiled. "Quite. I just brought a report. And were you here on business?" "Yes, papers to sign. I'm just leaving." She headed for the door, but turned around. "Listen, Alex, you offered a surfing lesson back then. Looks like the weather is nice this weekend. Is the offer still open?" His eyes lit up with excitement. "Of course. I'm ready any minute." "Then let's try." Sarah was surprised at her own words, but they had already slipped out. "Sunday morning off the coast. Just keep in mind, I'm a hopeless newbie." Alex beamed. "Don't worry, I'll be a patient teacher. I can rent a board for you." Agreed. Then we sent the address of the beach where it would be more convenient to meet. "By the way, do you have my number?" Sarah rummaged in her business card case and handed him her card. "Here's my mobile." He took the card carefully, as if it were something precious. "Thank you. I'll send you the details in a message. I think you'll like it." They said goodbye at the door. Sarah rode down the elevator, her heart pounding. "What am I doing?" A panicked thought flashed through her mind. Go to the beach with this guy? It was ambiguous and unsafe. Who knows who he really is? But the voice of reason was drowned out by the adrenaline that was boiling in her blood. After all, she just wants to go snowboarding. It's not a crime, not a reason for jealousy or suspicion. Mark is unlikely to even find out or pay attention. He is often busy on weekends or prefers to sleep off the workdays. Sarah consoled herself with the thought that she would just have some fun, especially since there would be an employee of their company nearby, not some random person. But deep down she knew the motive was not the thirst for sport. She missed sensations, new impressions, the lightness that communication with Alex gave her. And although she had not yet openly admitted it to herself, the first step towards a dangerous line had already been taken. Early Sunday morning, Sarah crept out of bed, careful not to wake Mark. He was fast asleep after a stressful week, and she left a note on his nightstand. Gone to yoga and breakfast with the girls. Be back around lunchtime. Love. It was a small lie. Instead of yoga, she was going to a surfing lesson with Alex. Sarah knew she didn't want to tell her husband about these plans. Deep down, she knew that if she'd been told about such a meeting, she'd have been wary. But now she desperately wanted to break out of her routine, to do something spontaneous, personal. Having reached the beach Alex had pointed out to the south of the city, Sarah parked by the road. The morning was crisp, the sky clear, the sun just rising over the ocean, painting the waves golden. There was almost no one on the beach, a couple of runners and a few surfers warming up by the water. Alex was waiting by his battered van with two planks lying next to it. When he saw Sarah, he smiled and waved. Sarah, taking off her sunglasses, waved back, trying to hide her excitement. Good morning. Alex was cheerful and happy. He was wearing a wetsuit, pulled down to his waist, revealing a tan torso. I thought you changed your mind. Hello, Sarah felt the cool morning breezes touch her cheeks. Or was it the heat of embarrassment? No, I'm not one to throw words to the wind. Alex pushed his hair back from his forehead. Great, I've already got everything ready. You'll have to wear this. He nodded toward the second wetsuit, neatly laid out on the hood of the van. Sarah nodded, taking the suit. She walked out of the house in a light dress with a bathing suit underneath. Looking around and not finding a changing room nearby, she looked questioningly at Alex. There's no one behind the rock, you can change there, he prompted, seeing her confusion. I won't spy, I promise. Sarah smiled and headed to the designated spot. She tried to stop her hands from shaking as she changed. It's just surfing, it's just a sport, she told herself. When she returned, pulling her wetsuit over her swimsuit, Alex had already slung the board over his shoulder. Are you ready? He asked. Ready, she replied, and they headed toward the water. The first attempts to stand on the board were comical. Sarah fell awkwardly into the cool waves several times, even swallowing some water. Alex helped her up each time, laughing and encouraging her. He patiently explained how to catch a wave, how to stand up, and how to keep her balance. At some point, when another wave knocked Sarah down, Alex grabbed her arm, holding her so that she wouldn't fall again. His strong arm wrapped around her waist, the other held the board. Almost there, he exclaimed, looking into her face from a distance of only a few inches. Sarah breathed heavily, wiping the salty spray from her eyes. She suddenly realized how close they were, her body pressed against his, water running down Alex's hair, sunbeams playing on his cheek. Her heart began to pound wildly. Alex froze too, still holding her waist. His smile turned serious. For a few long seconds, they simply stared into each other's eyes. Sarah felt a wave of emotion rising inside her, perhaps stronger than the ocean. She wanted to turn away, to take a step back, but her body seemed not to obey. Alex tilted his head slightly, his lips dangerously close. And just then, a shout was heard above the roar of the surf. Another surfer whooped happily as he caught a big wave nearby. Sarah winced and stepped back, freeing herself from Alex's grasp. Let's take a break, she said quickly, feeling her cheeks burning. Alex blinked, as if coming to his senses, and then nodded. Of course. Yes, you must be tired. Let's go to the shore. They climbed out onto the sand and plopped down next to each other on their towels. Sarah was trying to catch her breath, not only from the physical exertion, but also from the overwhelming emotions. Alex was lying on his back, looking up at the sky, trying, it seemed, to get back to normal. "You did very well for your first time," he said after a couple of minutes of silence. "Normally beginners give up right away." Sarah tried to smile. "Thank you. It was harder than I thought, but great. You're a great teacher." Alex turned his head to her. His eyes were filled with doubt, guilt. "Listen, Sarah, forgive me if I overdid it there in the water." She shook her head, looking at the surf line. "It's not your fault. Everything's fine." But was it okay? Sarah felt the opposite. Remembering how close their faces had been a second ago, she realized, just a little more, and they would have kissed. She would have let it happen. The thought turned everything inside her. Why? How did she get to this point? She is a married woman. She loves her husband. And some impulse with an almost boy almost made her cross the line. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought she could already taste the salty kiss that never happened. "I must have been looking at you too much." "I'm sorry," Alex repeated quietly. Sarah finally looked at him. There was real remorse in his eyes, mixed with the same confusion she felt. "It's all good, really," she said more softly. "It's just, let's pretend nothing happened. We got carried away. It happens to everyone." Alex raised himself up on his elbow. "You're right." He paused, then said hesitantly, "Maybe that's enough for today. You've had a good workout, and the sun is already warming up." Sarah heard disappointment in his voice. He was afraid that she would leave right now and never want to see him again. Paradoxically, it touched her. A young, handsome guy afraid to scare her away because he cared about her. "As you say," she nodded, sitting down. "I think it really is time." They helped each other unwrap the safety leashes on the boards and carried them to the car. Sarah went behind the rock again to change, this time feeling her heart ache with uncertainty. What would she say goodbye to? What would she do next? When she returned in her dress, Alex was dressed too, in shorts and a t-shirt. He was putting boards in the van. When he saw Sarah, he took 2 bottles of soda from a small refrigerator and handed her one. To top up the fluid balance, he tried to smile. They clinked the bottles and took a sip. The cool, sweet drink calmed their nerves a little. "Thank you," Sarah said. They stood next to his car. The sea roared behind them. The sun rose higher and higher, beginning to bake. The day promised to be hot. "Thank you for coming," Alex replied. "I hope the impressions aren't spoiled." "Oh no," she shook her head. "It was wonderful. A little dangerous," she allowed herself a smile, "but wonderful." Alex sighed with relief. "Well, in surfing, the danger is part of the fun. Sometimes you have to give in to the wave." Their eyes met again. The words sounded ambiguous, but neither of them made an attempt to clarify. For a second, it was as if an electric current ran between them again. Sarah felt her knees shaking. She took a nervous sip of her soda and looked down. She needed to say something, to clear the air, or she would lose her temper again. "We should probably go," they suddenly said at the same time and laughed out of awkwardness. "Yes, I need to go home," Sarah said. "Mark will probably wake up." She looked around, realizing that she didn't want this meeting to end so vaguely. But she was also afraid to invite or promise anything further. Alex scratched his head. "Of course. I have to go back too, before my neighbor drives off in my car. He gave me a ride, by the way." There was a pause. Then Sarah stepped forward and hugged him goodbye. Alex froze for a moment, but then hugged her too. She felt his warmth, his strong hands on her back. It lasted only a moment, but that moment was enough to make her heart beat wildly again. Sarah pulled back, looking at his face closely. Alex's lips twitched into a timid smile. She realized that he was smiling too. "See you later," she mouthed, turning towards her car before she changed her mind. "See you later," he echoed after her. On the way home, Sarah was tormented by conflicting feelings. The feeling of guilt gradually rolled in waves, no worse than the ocean. She had done nothing, she convinced herself. In fact, nothing. But her soul protested. Why then lie to her husband? Why this trembling in her body and sweet languor because she spent the morning like this with another man? When Mark, already awake, kissed her on the cheek at the threshold and asked how yoga with the girls went, Sarah smiled tensely. Wonderful. We had a great workout and even had breakfast on the beach. This, in fact, was not far from the truth. She really did have breakfast on the beach, albeit with someone else. Mark, unsuspecting, returned to his laptop, where he was working on some documents. Sarah hid in the bathroom, where she stood under the shower for a long time, hoping to wash off not the ocean salt. The salt water had already dried, leaving a slight tightness on her skin, but to wash away the new anxiety that had settled inside her. But in her heart, she found herself thinking about the way Alex had held her, the way he had looked at her, and that somewhere deep inside, she wanted to do it again. The next few days passed relatively quietly. Sarah was immersed in the affairs of the charity ball, then there were negotiations with investors. In short, she tried to distract herself. Alex did not make himself known, and she, too, remained silent. It seemed that both were waiting to see what would happen next. The answer came unexpectedly. On Friday evening, when Mark was late at work and Sarah was having dinner alone, the phone rang. The name appeared on the screen, Alex Marketing. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. She hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Hello? Hi, Sarah, a familiar voice said on the other end of the line. Sorry to call so late. I just wanted to see how you were feeling after our swim. Are you okay? Are your muscles sore? Sarah couldn't help but smile, imagining him at that moment. Hi, Alex. Everything's fine, don't worry. My back was a little sore the next day, but I'm better now. I'm glad to hear it, he said, sounding relieved. I thought maybe I overdid it with the training. No, what are you saying? Sarah lowered her voice, even though she was home alone. Everything was wonderful. There was a pause, then Alex asked quietly. I've been thinking about it all week, really. I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstanding between us. You're not angry with me, are you? No, of course not, she answered quickly. It's just a complicated situation. I understand, he said quietly. You know, I'm not claiming anything. I just really like spending time with you, and I'm glad if I can give you joy or distract you from your worries. Sarah's heart ached at those simple words. There was sincerity in them, such a pure youthful impulse that she felt it was becoming increasingly difficult to resist. You're very sweet, Alex, she whispered. But it's not right. I have a husband. I know, he interrupted softly, and I respect you both. Your history, everything you've accomplished. You're a wonderful couple. Sarah suddenly gave a painful smile. If Alex only knew how long it had been since she felt like part of a wonderful couple. It's just that if you suddenly want to study again, go somewhere. I'll be glad. Without any expectations, honestly. I'm just glad to be around. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at his words. The sensitivity and kindness in his voice seemed to have broken a dam inside her. Alex, on the other end of the line, was alarmed. Sarah, forgive me if I said too much. She swallowed, clearing the telltale moisture from her eyes. No, it's okay. I'm the one who's touched. They were silent for a moment. Then Sarah made the decision that had been brewing within her all week. You know, I am free tomorrow evening. If you want, we can meet and have dinner. As friends, she added hastily. Yes, of course, he responded quickly, and she almost saw him smiling. As friends, I know a place, not very well known, but cozy. You'll like it. Then I'll wait for a message with the address, Sarah said quietly. 7 will suit me. I'll wait, Alex replied. After saying goodbye, Sarah lowered the phone and covered her face with her hands. She had taken a step she had promised herself she wouldn't take. Tomorrow she would have a date. There was no other way to describe it with another man. She could have canceled, written that she had changed her mind. But Sarah didn't do that. She was drawn to Alex like a magnet, to the feeling of lightness and admiration that she felt next to him. It was as if her soul was thawing, feeling not only like someone's wife, part of an important cause, but also just a woman desirable, interesting. Before going to bed, she looked into the office, where Mark, who had finally returned, was finishing writing something on the computer. "Are you coming soon?" she asked from the doorway. Mark raised his tired eyes to her. "Yes, I'm finishing up. Sorry, I stayed up late again." "It's okay," Sarah tried to smile. "I'll go to bed. I'm very tired today." He nodded silently, looking back at the screen. Sarah stood there for another second, hoping that he would finally get distracted and come over to kiss her goodnight, like he used to. But Mark was deep in his numbers. In the bedroom, Sarah stared at the ceiling for a long time, feeling bitter. Why was it all like this? She didn't want to cheat, she sought support from her own husband, but he seemed to be already living in a parallel reality. And they themselves had been working towards this for so long, she thought. A big company, success. This is what they wanted, and now the price for this is themselves. She forced herself to fall asleep, trying not to think about what would happen tomorrow. Saturday night found Sarah at the door of a small restaurant on the outskirts of town. It was a secluded place indeed, with soft lantern light in the garden, tables for two under climbing roses. Alex was already waiting inside, looking visibly nervous. Seeing her, he stood up and hurried to push his chair back. "You look wonderful," he said. Sarah prepared herself carefully. A light dress of a muted green shade, loose hair, minimal makeup. She wanted to be natural, but attractive. "Thank you," she said, sitting down. And, "Let's not be formal. You promised no expectations. Let's just talk as equals, okay?" Alex nodded sheepishly. "Sure. Sorry, I just can't believe you came." They ordered some light snacks, fish, white wine. The conversation initially revolved around general topics, music, movies. Then Alex told about his family. He was an only child. His parents live in the South. They are proud of him. Sarah told about her student years, funny episodes of startup life. An atmosphere of warmth and intimacy gradually enveloped their table. The wine shimmered in the glasses, the candle flickered softly. Sarah laughed at Alex's jokes, feeling how easy it had been for a long time since she had experienced such happiness. When the restaurant was almost empty, they went out into the garden to stroll before leaving. Alex carefully took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Sarah did not take it away, but on the contrary, squeezed his palm. In the quiet of the evening, amid the scent of roses, it was so natural. Stopping under the branches of an old oak tree, they turned to face each other. Alex lifted her chin with his free hand and looked into her eyes as if asking permission. Sarah responded with a trembling breath, nodding slowly. Their kiss was timid, gentle. But as soon as their lips touched, a wave of heat washed over them. Sarah wrapped her arms around Alex's neck, responding more passionately. He pressed her to himself. The minutes lost their meaning. When they finally pulled away, Sarah was dizzy. She felt both scared and incredibly good. Alex gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm sorry. I couldn't." He began, but she pressed her finger to his lips. "No need," she whispered. "I wanted this myself." They kissed again, this time without holding back. That evening, she had truly cheated on her husband for the first time, completely immersed in the feeling that had taken hold of her. Alex had become a breath of fresh air for her, a forbidden fruit that was impossible to refuse once you had tried it. Returning home late at night, Sarah tiptoed into the bedroom. Mark slept, unaware that an invisible but fateful earthquake had struck his life. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah seemed to live in two worlds at once. In one, she was still the model wife of a successful entrepreneur, a co-owner of a company, appearing at events with a perfect smile next to her husband. In the other, she was the passionate lover of a young man, burning with impatience at every secret meeting, every call or message from him. She carefully separated these worlds. Sarah's phone was now always with her. Under a password even Mark noticed and once asked jokingly, "Are you afraid of a spy? We didn't have secrets from each other before." Sarah then waved it off, citing the fact that the phone contained a lot of confidential work correspondence. Mark did not insist, although these words stung Sarah. Yes, once there were no secrets. Now one huge secret had firmly settled between them. They began seeing Alex regularly. At first, cautiously casual lunches on a weekday under the pretext of discussing marketing strategy in the office no one suspected, because formally Sarah could meet with an employee on business. Then informally, sometimes he invited her to run together in the park in the morning, sometimes she came to him under the guise of a visit to a beautician. Each of these dates brought her a mixture of joy and excruciating stress. Joy because she felt wanted and alive next to Alex. Stress because any misstep could ruin everything. Sarah became more careful. She created a separate messenger for communicating with him, turned off pop-up notifications on her tablet, and deleted message synchronization between devices. She understood that she had to be extremely vigilant. Alex also realized the risk. At work, he behaved impeccably, addressed her exclusively by her first name and patronymic in front of strangers, slightly amused by such formality, because in private he called her simply Sarah or even affectionately, stretching out the name. If they ran into each other in the office or at meetings, they did not give away their closeness with a single gesture. Perhaps someone noticed that Sarah began to appear more often in the marketing department, but this did not seem strange. The management is always interested in how work with clients is progressing. However, the situation at home was getting worse. Mark, absorbed in his work, still felt that his wife was somehow distant. She became less interested in the details of his day and could forget about plans or requests. Sometimes she returned later than him, although usually it was he who stayed late. She answered questions evasively. "I was late, business," or "I stopped by Catherine's for tea after the meeting." Mark tried to believe, but anxiety grew inside. One night, when Sarah went to bed after a shower, Mark tried to hug her, kiss her, hinting at intimacy. Previously, she would have responded willingly, but now she gently pulled away under the pretext of fatigue. Mark turned to the wall, hiding his bitter disappointment. Such refusals became more frequent. Sarah often avoided intimacy, and Mark painfully wondered if it was really his fault. Maybe she didn't like him anymore, or was she angry that he didn't spend enough time with her? He tried to start conversations, asking if everything was okay with them. Sarah swore that yes, she just had a lot of worries. She was tired both physically and mentally. "Maybe I need a break," she said one day over breakfast. "To go away somewhere for a week on my own to unwind." Mark became wary and put down his fork. "Alone? Without me?" Sarah shrugged, carefully buttering her toast. "Just for a few days. A change of scenery," she said quietly, avoiding his gaze. "But why alone? Did I do something wrong? Do you want a break from me?" Mark's voice sounded hurt and worried. Sarah sighed, realizing she had alarmed him. "No, no, of course. It's not about you directly. I love you. It's just, I haven't been myself lately. I want to be alone with myself, to sort out my thoughts. And you can't do it with me." Mark clasped his hands together. "We're partners, remember? If something's wrong, tell me." She looked at him pleadingly. "Mark, please. Don't make it complicated. I just really need time and space. It's like a reboot." He didn't like these words, but he tried to remain calm. Sarah quickly caught herself. "I mean, you can't leave the company now, and I could use some time. I could fly to a yoga retreat or something. Get my head straight." Mark squeezed his coffee cup. He didn't like the idea. Vacation, yes, but why alone? They had always planned vacations together, even if not often. Something was insistently knocking at his subconscious. Letting his wife go alone now would mean risking the marriage. He didn't fully realize it, but he felt it in his gut. "Maybe we should try to get out together," he suggested cautiously. "I understand that we're up to our necks in work right now, but we can plan it in a month, for example. We'll take a vacation." Sarah shrugged. "We'll see, if there's a chance, of course." She turned away, pretending to look out the window, and Mark saw a shadow of disappointment on her face. as if his answer wasn't what she wanted to hear. In reality, Sarah had hoped to get away with Alex, to go away under some plausible pretext to spend time with him somewhere far away. It was just a dream for now, but she was seriously considering it. Meanwhile, the relationship with Alex was becoming deeper. Secret dates intoxicated them both. Once, having escaped for a couple of days under the pretext of a business trip to Los Angeles, Sarah actually spent this time with Alex on the coast, renting a hotel room. They walked along the beach, had candlelit dinners, laughed, made love until exhaustion. In those moments, Sarah felt like she had found a lost part of herself, the carefree girl she once was, before all these corporate battles and statuses. But every time she returned home, she felt the noose of lies tightening. Mark greeted her with a short kiss, asking about the trip. Sarah answered mechanically, languishing with shame. For some reason, her husband's simplest questions began to irritate her after all. Behind each one, there was a danger that he would guess. Sometimes, looking at his sincere face, she wanted to give up everything, confess, stop deceiving. But then the image of Alex would pop up, his smile, voice, touch, and her determination would melt away. Mark, meanwhile, was tormenting himself with guesses. The gap between them was widening. He tried to blame it on her fatigue or emotional burnout after years of hard work. He even consulted with his friend Dan, his first engineer and longtime friend. Maybe she really needs a rest, Dan suggested one day over lunch when Mark shared his worries. You've been through a lot of stress over the years. There could have been an emotional crisis. Yes, probably. Mark picked at his salad with his fork without much appetite. It's just that she's being so strangely distant. I'm afraid that she might fall out of love with me or something. Dan chuckled. After all these years, why all of a sudden? You're the perfect couple. Everyone says so. Mark just shrugged. He didn't want to share his suspicions even with his friend. What suspicions exactly? That Sarah was cheating. No, he pushed that thought away. Sarah wasn't like that. She was loyal. She had been through so much with him. And yet, one evening, while going through their joint finances, Mark noticed something odd. Sarah's bank statement listed several expenses he didn't understand. A large hotel bill in Los Angeles, the business trip she'd talked about. Several restaurant bills he'd never been to with her. A jewelry store receipt for expensive men's cufflinks, but he'd never received any gifts. Mark frowned as he looked at the numbers. He wasn't used to keeping an eye on his wife, but now it was as if someone had punched him in the gut. Coincidences were forming. A sudden need to be alone, coldness, a lie about the trip, and now expenses that couldn't be explained by work meetings. Mark barely slept that night. He got up in the middle of the night, went down to the living room and drank a shot of whiskey, trying to calm down. His heart was pounding. He could no longer deny the obvious. Something was wrong. Sarah was deceiving him. The question was, how seriously? The next day, for the first time in years, he stopped by the house in the afternoon, citing illness at the office. Deep down, he hated playing the role of a jealous husband, but he saw no other way to allay or confirm his fears. The house was empty. No Sarah, no car. Mark walked through the rooms as if hoping to find the answer to his inner question on the shelves or in the closets. Everything looked as usual. Only on the dressing table in the bedroom did he notice a velvet box from a jewelry store. His heart sank when he opened it. Mark saw men's cufflinks with inlay, the same ones that he once mentioned as beautiful, but decided not to buy, deciding that they were too expensive. So, was Sarah preparing a gift for him? Logic suggested that yes, their wedding anniversary was approaching. Perhaps she was preparing a surprise. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cufflinks. If this was how she was preparing to celebrate the anniversary, maybe he was just overexciting himself. Maybe she really hadn't cheated, but was just going through an internal crisis. He clutched at the thought. Yes, he had to calm down. He would give her a gift in return, take her somewhere. He had to save their marriage, not spy. Mark slammed the box shut and put it back, trying to forget about his suspicions from yesterday. In the evening, Sarah returned, lively and full of energy. She explained her absence by visiting a friend outside the city, apologized for not warning her she lost contact. Mark nodded, pretending to believe her. She really did look rested and happy. Her eyes were shining, that's how she usually shone after a spa or shopping. He forced himself to smile and said that he was thinking about their anniversary. Maybe we should celebrate in a special way, he suggested casually. It's almost 10 years after all. Sarah's face tightened slightly, but she nodded quickly. Sure, I have a few ideas too. This behavior was confusing. If she were having an affair, would she be preparing an anniversary gift for him? Mark was getting conflicting signals and no longer knew what to believe. And Sarah was getting more and more nervous. The anniversary was approaching 10 years of marriage. She knew that Mark would probably want to arrange something, and she herself thought from morning till night, what should she do? It was becoming increasingly difficult to be torn between two men. Alex hinted that he would like to spend more time with her, but he understood her situation. He himself began to have problems. One of his colleagues noticed how he was constantly writing tender messages to someone and began to joke about a secret passion. Alex told Sarah about this, and they decided to be even more careful, avoiding correspondence during working hours. Deep down, Sarah knew this was all a powder keg. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. Sometimes at night, she would lie staring at the ceiling and think, what am I doing with my life? But then she would clutch her phone tighter, rereading Alex's last tender messages. A week before the anniversary, Mark announced that he would have to go to Silicon Valley for the day on the anniversary itself to meet with an important client. At first, he offered to reschedule, but Sarah suddenly said, "No problem. We'll celebrate tonight when you get back." It actually made her feel better. It gave her an excuse not to spend the entire day together when she was racked with guilt. It also gave her an opportunity to carve out a few hours for herself and maybe for Alex too, even on the anniversary. The idea was crazy, but it stuck in her head. However, the implementation was not destined to happen. Fate decreed otherwise, and did not allow her to plan anything. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. Ironically, it was the day everything came out. In the morning, Mark was getting ready for a meeting with a client in San Jose. Sarah was still sleeping after returning late from some social dinner, at least that's what she told him the night before, returning late at night. Mark dressed quietly, trying not to make any noise, and went downstairs. On the kitchen table, he saw Sarah's tablet, the same one they had once bought together for the home. Sarah usually took it to read the news and watch TV series, but sometimes she left it in the kitchen to charge. Mark wasn't going to rummage through anything. He just mechanically pressed the button, checking whether the device needed to be charged. The screen lit up, asking for a password. Mark was about to put the tablet down when suddenly a notification banner appeared, an incoming message. He managed to see part of the text, a few words that would forever be etched in his memory. "Can't wait for tonight. Love you." Mark froze. The sender's name appeared on the screen. Alex, there was a heart emoji next to it. A cold wave of foreboding rose in his chest. He looked at the words in disbelief. Who was Alex? Love you. Was this a joke? His fingers trembled. Almost without realizing what he was doing, he entered the password at random, his wife's date of birth. The tablet unlocked. It turned out that Sarah had not changed the password, although she had disabled part of the synchronization. And now the very same secret messenger that she had installed to communicate with her lover was open on the screen. Mark felt the blood rush to his temples. He didn't want to see this, didn't want to know, but he couldn't stop. He slid his finger across the message history. Line by line, someone else's intimate life unfolded before him on the screen. His wife and someone named Alex, apparently that same employee from marketing. They corresponded daily. There were jokes, plans for meetings, words of tenderness. The further Mark scrolled, the gloomier his soul became. Here is a discussion of a recent trip to Los Angeles, the same one where Sarah was supposedly at negotiations. It turned out that there was no business. She wrote to Alex that she missed him, sent a photo in the mirror of a hotel room with a caption, "Waiting for you," then frank confessions that made Mark choke. Sarah, his soulmate, wrote to another man, "I can't live without you. I'm burning with desire." Alex responded in the same tone, affectionately calling her "my dear" and other words that made Mark's eyes darken. His hands weakened, the tablet almost fell to the floor. Mark sank into a chair. It was unknown how long he sat there before he could force himself to look at the screen again. The last message from Alex had just arrived. "I love you," the same one he had seen initially, and above it was, "Can I see you today, even for an hour? I promise it will be the best gift for our little anniversary." A little anniversary. Mark's heart sank. They must be celebrating some kind of anniversary, too. Maybe the day they started dating. He didn't want to know. There was a buzzing in his ears. Mark covered his face with his hands. He wanted to scream and cry at the same time. It was a nightmare come true. A stupid mistake, a misunderstanding. But no, the text on the screen was inexorably clear. Sarah was cheating on him. And judging by the number of messages, she had been doing it for a long time, systematically, with passion. The picture of the world turned upside down. Mark seemed to fall into emptiness. He came to his senses only when he was standing at the sink, splashing cold water on his face. His own reflection, white and distorted with pain, looked at him in the mirror. His hands were shaking. A thought crept into his head. What if this is all some kind of mistake? Maybe it's not what it seems, but he'd seen too much, and shadows of doubt had haunted him these past months. Here it was, in all its glory, his wife had betrayed him. The first impulse was to run upstairs, wake Sarah, and throw this evidence in her face. To expose her, demand an explanation, scream, splash out all this burning mixture of pain and anger that was seething inside. Mark took a step toward the stairs, but froze, clenching his fists. The picture presented itself too clearly. There would be a scandal, screams, tears. She would probably rush to justify herself, or, on the contrary, accuse him of having driven her to this. In any case, it would not return what was lost. He could almost physically feel something breaking inside him. What they had built over the years' trust, closeness all collapsed in an instant, and it couldn't be glued back together. Mark slowly sank down to the bottom step of the stairs. He was shaking. Images of the past flashed through his mind. Sarah standing in the garage with a cup of coffee and saying that she believed in him. She was throwing herself on his neck in euphoria after closing her first big deal. They were dancing at their wedding, young and happy. And then the cold lines on the screen, sobering as an electric shock. Tears choked Mark, but he held back. Some steel vein inside him kept him from falling into hysterics. He stood up and wiped his face. He had to decide what to do next. The question, "Why did she do it?" screamed in her mind, but there were no answers, and perhaps it no longer mattered. As did the question, "What should I do to get it all back?" Nothing would bring it back. One thought was clear. He couldn't continue this life with her, knowing about the deception. Even if Sarah begged him to forgive him now, would he ever be able to trust her again? No, the wound was too deep. Mark picked up the tablet and quietly, trying not to make any noise, returned to the kitchen. There he carefully photographed the screen, scrolled through the correspondence, taking pictures of the most telling places. He did not fully understand why he was simply mechanically collecting evidence, as if he already knew. There was a battle ahead. When he heard Sarah's footsteps upstairs, Mark had already left the house. His heart was breaking because he didn't want to see her. He couldn't even look at her now without disgust and pain. He got into the car and drove away, canceling the meeting with the client to hell. There was a long day ahead, which was to be the last day of their marriage, although Sarah did not yet suspect it. Mark was sitting in his car in the parking lot of a featureless glass high-rise that housed the law firm his company worked with on business matters. As soon as he left his house, he called their longtime lawyer, Mr. Walsh, and bluntly asked for an urgent, confidential meeting. Something must have been in his voice because the lawyer, despite the early hour, agreed to see him immediately. Now, looking ahead at the dim reflections in the windshield, Mark tried to gather his will into a fist. He had already made a decision that morning from which he was not going to retreat. There would be a divorce. They say that in such cases, people first rush to save the family. They scream, cry, beg, look for someone to blame. But he felt a strange numbness, as if a switch had clicked inside and his feelings turned off, giving way to cold calculation. The pain was somewhere in the background, a booming wave, but now it could be controlled. Mark walked up to the lawyer's office. Walsh, a tall, gray-haired man, greeted him with a sympathetic expression. "Mark, sit down. Is something wrong? You sounded on the phone." Mark sat down in a leather chair opposite the table and, without entering into foreplay, quietly said, "Sarah is cheating on me. I want to file for divorce. Today." Walsh was silent for a few seconds, processing what he had heard. Then he sighed heavily and sat down. "I sympathize. Are you sure you want to make such a decision in the heat of the moment? Divorce is a serious matter. Maybe there is a chance." Mark shook his head, feeling his throat tighten. "No chance. I know for sure. I'm not going to find out or save anything. It's over." He pulled out his phone, opened the gallery, and turned away, handing it to the lawyer. "Here, you can scroll through. Is that enough?" Walsh picked up the phone hesitantly. He studied the photos of the conversation for a few minutes, frowning occasionally. Then he cursed under his breath and set the phone down on the table. "Damn. Sorry. This is certainly enough to justify the reason for divorce. Although, in our state, infidelity does not directly affect the division of property, but as a factor, it can be taken into account in the agreement." Mark nodded. He knew California was in effect. No-fault divorce, that is, it doesn't matter who is to blame, the property is usually divided equally if there is no marriage contract. "But we had a prenuptial agreement," he reminded me, "even before the first round of investments. You insisted on it yourself." "That's right." The lawyer came to his senses, opened a file on his computer, and ran his eyes over it. According to the agreement, in the event of a divorce, each party retains their personal assets and their share in the business. Simply put, Sarah retains her personal savings, property registered in her name, and her personal share package in the company if it is registered. You retain everything else. Mark closed his eyes. God, it was a good thing he had listened to the lawyer's advice and insisted on a contract. Back then, 7 years ago, it had seemed a formality, even offensive. He remembered how upset Sarah had been at first, even though she had signed it. But now this document protected his case. "Her stake in the company is small," Walsh continued. 5% registered to her as a co-founder. The rest is yours and the investors. The house is shared. The cars are one in your name, the other in hers. A joint account, but there's not much money in it relative to the assets. Overall, there's not much to divide. Everything is more or less clear. "Then the contract is still in force," Mark said firmly. "There are no grounds to challenge it. Moreover, betrayal on her part is not a reason for cancellation, rather the opposite." "Yes," the lawyer shook his head. "I'm sorry that we had to foresee this, but, okay, then let's act. I can prepare and submit the papers today. Do you want to notify her yourself, or would you prefer that we do it officially?" Mark thought about it. The image of the morning correspondence rose before his eyes again, and his heart filled with icy rage. He remembered that today was their anniversary, the day they were supposed to celebrate, and he would be the date of the end. It even seemed symbolic to him to cut everything off right at this line. "I'll tell her myself," he said after a pause. "Today, it's the anniversary. I think it's appropriate." Walsh looked at him doubtfully, but didn't argue. "Okay, then I'll prepare the paperwork and send a courier to your house this evening, or wherever you say. She'll need to sign it. If she refuses, we'll formally sue, but I don't think she'll make a big deal out of it." Mark smiled bitterly. He wasn't sure that Sarah wouldn't, but she would see. After discussing a few more technical issues regarding the account, the house, notifying investors, he couldn't allow the divorce to damage the company's reputation. Mark left the office. As soon as the elevator doors closed, it hit him. This was really happening. He was already divorced. All that was left was the formalities. 10 years of marriage were over. Suddenly, tears welled up in his eyes. Mark took a deep breath, trying to hold them back. No, later, later, not now. There were a few hours left until evening. He didn't want to go home. Sarah was there, with whom he still had to talk. Instead, Mark went to the company office, not so much on business, but simply to be where everything was familiar, among people to whom he could smile through force, without fear of being asked what was wrong with him. And yet, looking at the piles of documents, trying to immerse himself in work, he could not drive away the oppressive thoughts. The employees greeted him, brought papers to sign, and probably noticed that the boss was pale and taciturn today. But no one dared to ask. In the hallway, he bumped into Dan. Hearing about the urgent departure for a meeting, he was surprised to see Mark in the office. But Mark waved it off, like it fell through, I'll explain later. Not now. By midday, he could no longer sit still. He decided to leave to prepare his spirit for what was to come. Passing the marketing department, Mark automatically looked for that same Alex. He was sitting at his desk among his colleagues, typing something intently. A young face, unremarkable one of hundreds like him. And this man dared to interfere with his family. Mark stopped. For a moment, he was overcome by a burning desire to rush in, grab the guy by the scruff of the neck, and throw him out of the office in front of everyone. Or punch him, knocking a couple of teeth out of that smug face. But instead, he just tightened his grip on the file and moved on. He had a bigger fight ahead of him with his own feelings, which he would have to keep in check while looking into his wife's eyes and declaring that he knew everything. Evening was falling over the city when Mark stopped the car near the house. The lights were on in the windows. Sarah was waiting for him. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his courage. In the glove compartment lay an envelope with documents that he had picked up from the courier on the way. On top, for appearance's sake, lay a greeting card. Taking a deep breath, Mark stepped out of the car. His hands were tingling with tension. He was ready for this meeting, although everything inside was shaking. Sarah greeted him at the door with a smile. She had changed into her best clothes, the same dark blue dress he remembered from the mayor's party long ago. Her hair was done up, and she wore an elegant necklace. Candles flickered on the table in the living room, and there was a bucket of ice and champagne. "Hi," she came up to hug him and kiss him on the cheek. "Happy anniversary, darling." Mark almost physically pulled away inside, although he tried to remain neutral. "Hi, happy anniversary." He walked inside, trying not to look at her shining face. Once more, this only made the pain worse. Sarah was clearly trying to create romance. "I thought we'd celebrate at home, just the two of us," she said, taking his coat. "I ordered dinner from a restaurant, your favorite steak, and—" She smiled a little sheepishly. "I have a present for you." Mark nodded, mechanically placing the briefcase with documents against the wall. "Sounds good. Let's open some champagne." "Of course," she said happily, sitting him down on the sofa. He saw her fingers trembling with anticipation as she uncorked the bottle. You would think she was genuinely happy to be here with him now, but he knew what she was probably thinking about another man, to whom she had literally written words of love today. Sarah filled the glasses and handed one to him. "To us, Mark," she said softly, clinking glasses. "For 10 years, we've lived hand in hand, and," she smiled, "to the many more to come." Mark stared at the sparkling wine, mesmerized. Too many more to come. How could she make these toasts, looking into his eyes, knowing that she was deceiving him every day? Anger bubbled up inside him, but he controlled himself. They took a sip. Sarah moved closer, touching his shoulder. "I'm so glad you're here now. I know the last few months haven't been easy, but we made it through, right?" Mark was silent. His throat was tight. He was afraid to utter a word for fear of losing his temper. I'm sorry if I was distant or hurtful," she continued, looking down. "I'm just a little confused. But today," she placed her hand on his, "I want us to remember how great we are. Look at all we've accomplished together. I'm proud of us. And," she lowered her voice, "I love you, Mark." She said the last words almost in a whisper, and they made Mark's insides freeze. I love you. She had written the same thing to someone else today. What irony, he hears her confession of love, and he wants to laugh and scream at the same time. He carefully removed her hand from his. It's time. Did you want to tell me something? Sarah became wary, noticing the change in his face. Mark stood up and walked over to the mantelpiece where their framed wedding photographs stood. He paused for a moment on one of them. He and Sarah, very young, laughing as they ran from the rice rain outside the town hall, happy. Deceived, he had believed then that happiness would last forever. Yes, he said quietly, without turning around. I also prepared a gift for you today, a special one. He heard her jump to her feet behind him, clapping her hands cheerfully. Really? And I thought you forgot. Wait, first my. Sarah impulsively went to the dresser and took out a small box tied with a ribbon. For you? Happy anniversary. She handed him the gift. Mark glanced at the box. It wasn't hard to guess what was inside, most likely the same cufflinks from the display case. How symbolic. She would give him cufflinks, and he would give her a divorce. Thank you. He didn't take the box, but instead picked up his envelope from the table and handed it to her. And here's my gift to you. Sarah was momentarily confused, but then accepted the envelope with a smile. What is this? A postcard? She pulled out the card and read the meaningless, cliched congratulations. Mark was silent, watching. Sarah looked at him, puzzled, then peered into the envelope and pulled out the rest of the thick packet of papers. She unfolded them and began to read. Her face changed rapidly as her eyes scanned the lines. What is this? She barely managed to utter, tearing herself away from the text, as if not believing her eyes. These, Mark enunciated each word, are divorce papers. I filed them today. Sarah froze, her mouth hanging open. Paleness flooded her cheeks. Divorce? What? But why? Mark, is this some kind of joke? She flipped through the pages, confused. Divorce without division of property. Agreement of the parties. She frowned. Why without division? What about? Suddenly her eyes widened. She raised her head. A marriage contract. Are you? Are you serious? Absolutely, he said quietly. But there was shock in her eyes. Her voice was shaking. Mark, for what? It's an anniversary. I don't understand. Her hand shook as she clutched the pages. Mark felt a prick, a horrifying image. A woman in an evening gown, by candlelight, holding not a bouquet of flowers, but papers about the end of a marriage. But he forced himself to be firm. I think you understand, Sarah. You understand very well. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I don't understand. Explain to me. Is it because I've been cold lately? Or what? Why are you so? Mark couldn't take it anymore. He snapped. For lying, he said sharply, hitting the mantelpiece with his palm. Several photographs fell, one glass cracked. For betrayal, Sarah. For leading me on for 6 months. Sarah flinched and stepped back. What are you talking about? Mark turned to her. Now he was looking straight into her confused, frightened face, and he could no longer contain either rage or pain. You think I'm blind? You think I don't know? He growled through clenched teeth. I know everything, Sarah, about you and Alex. A heavy silence fell over the room. Only the candle wicks crackled on the table. Sarah stood still, like a statue, not breathing. Mark took a step toward her, clenching his fists. I saw your messages, this morning, on your tablet. Her eyes darted around, despair in them. Her lips moved silently, trying to say something. You cheat, she finally whispered. It's not what you think. Don't you dare, Mark raised his voice. Don't you dare deny it. It's all there in black and white. At least don't lie now. Sarah gasped and covered her face with her hands. Oh God, Mark, I'm sorry. She burst into tears, falling right onto the floor, unable to cope with the overwhelming weakness. The documents fell from her hands and scattered across the parquet in white sheets. Mark looked down at her. Everything in his chest was seething. His once proud, confident wife now broken on her knees, crying. Should he have felt satisfaction? But there was only bitter devastation. Sarah crawled closer and grabbed his pants with her hands, sobbing. Mark, Mark, darling, please. This is a mistake. I don't know what came over me. This is all a lie. He recoiled, freeing himself from her grip. Don't touch me. She looked up, mascara running in black lines down her cheeks. I'll explain everything. Just don't go. Don't ruin everything like that. Please. Mark smiled bitterly, amazed by her words. I'm the one who's destroying it. Don't make me laugh, Sarah. You destroyed everything. Yourself. It was a mistake. Stupid. She babbled through her tears. I was lonely. You weren't there. I don't know why. It doesn't mean anything, do you hear? I love you, only you. He's just an infatuation. The words flowed in a disjointed stream. Mark felt that just a little more and the anger would evaporate, replaced by pity. And he did not want to pity her. A hobby, you say? His voice sounded terribly calm. Half a year of lies, nothing. Jumping into his bed, that's also it. Fun? Sarah burst into tears even more, trying to touch his leg. Forgive me. I beg you. I'll break up with him, I swear, right now. Today, just don't leave me. She grabbed him by the waist, pressing her cheek to his stomach. Mark froze, experiencing a strange feeling of unreality of what was happening. Yesterday, he would not have believed that his proud Sarah would humiliate herself to beg on her knees. But here she was, clinging to him like a drowning woman. Let go, he said quietly. It's no use. No, no, please. She sobbed, not letting go. I don't want to lose you. I was a fool. Forgive me. I beg you. Mark gritted his teeth, feeling the anger drain away, leaving only fatigue. It's too late. You've already lost. He gently loosened her fingers from his belt and stepped back. Sarah tried to stand up, swaying, and grabbed the back of the chair. Her eyes darted over the scattered papers and suddenly stopped in one place. She sobbed and picked up the sheet. What? What is this? Only 5%. She sobbed, peering. No, no, I won't agree. I have the right to half. We built everything together. Mark grinned this time. It was evil. Now the real thing had burst out. The property under the contract you signed? Remember? He snapped. You'll only get what you're entitled to. Your car, your bills, and the measly 5% of the shares I once signed over to you out of gratitude. You won't get half the company, Sarah. Not a cent more than we agreed upon. She shook her head, tearing the sheets with shaking hands. You can't. You can't do this to me. This is my company, my life. I gave everything. And then you sold it for an affair with a boy. Mark cut her off sharply. How could you think that after that you deserve even a piece of what we built? You destroyed our family. Forget about enjoying the fruits of our labor. I will leave you exactly as much as the law requires. No more. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes, breathing heavily, pain frozen on her face, then anger flared. So that's how it is. She spat, wiping tears from her chin with the back of her hand. The great Mark Weston threw me out the moment I made a mistake. As soon as trouble arose, you ran for the hills. Mark winced at the impudence. Problems? You call betrayal a problem I had to endure? It's your own fault, she cried out, squeezing the sheet of paper until it crunched. You were never there. For months you saw me only as a business partner, not a woman. Do you think it was easy for me? I lacked warmth, attention. You left me a long time ago, even before Alex. I simply filled the void that you created. Her words hung in the air. Mark felt his cheeks burn. He knew partly that there was some truth to it. Yes, he had let their relationship slide. But was that an excuse for cheating? Maybe, he replied coldly. Maybe I'm not perfect. But do you know what the difference is between us, Sarah? I didn't go looking for solace elsewhere. You did. She bit her lip, and the hysterical rage subsided, replaced by sobs. I, I was weak. Yes, I'm guilty, but that doesn't mean that all is lost. Don't throw me out, I beg you. We can start over. I'll do anything. I'll go to a psychologist. We'll go somewhere. Whatever you say, just don't do this. She pointed to the papers. Mark felt a strange calm in the midst of this storm of emotions. He suddenly realized there was nothing left to hold him back. Love? It died the moment he read those messages. Only pain remained, and even that would dull with time. It's too late, he repeated, picking up his now unnecessary postcard from the floor. I've already decided everything. Sarah didn't seem to hear. She rushed towards him, grabbing the lapels of his jacket. Don't leave me. I beg you. I can't live without you. You are everything to me. Mark looked at her. He saw before him the same woman he had lived with for 10 years, but now it was as if a veil had fallen from his eyes. He saw her true face, ready to do anything, just not to lose her comfortable life. Where was this plea when she went to another? Then she did not care that he could lose her. He gently removed her hands. Once you were everything to me, not anymore. Sarah burst into tears, covering her face. Mark released his fingers, and the greeting card fell to the floor. He turned and walked toward the exit. Where are you going? She cried out after him in despair. To the lawyer, he said over his shoulder. Sign the papers. Don't make things worse with a scandal. He walked out of the house, slamming the door loudly, drowning out her sobs. The night air burned his lungs on the porch. Mark took a few steps, feeling the ground slipping away from under his feet. He managed to reach the car when the wave rolled in. It rolled in after all. He clutched the door with his hand and burst into tears. He choked himself with tears, moaned in pain through clenched teeth, pounded his fist on the cold metal. Inside, a whole chapter of his life had ended. Everything he believed in had collapsed. Well, now all that was left was to pick up the pieces and try to live on. Several weeks passed. The divorce was finalized quickly and almost without noise. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, there were a minimum of formalities. Everything was settled privately. For the press and those around them, it was dryly announced. By mutual decision, Mark and Sarah Weston are separating. The reasons were not specified, but rumors began to spread in narrow circles. San Francisco is a cramped city, and some people knew about Sarah's affair. Either one of the employees saw the correspondence, or Sarah herself, in tears, shared it with a friend, and she could not hold her tongue. Either way, the story quickly ceased to be just their personal affair. Mark didn't care. He felt empty. The spacious mansion that had recently been their family nest now seemed empty and cold. He no longer saw Sarah there by agreement. She had gone to a friend's while she looked for a smaller place. And he didn't want to see her either. All contacts went through lawyers. It all ended up exactly as he had said. Sarah kept only her car, her savings, and the 5% of the company shares that were in her name. Mark kept the house and the rest of the property for himself, paying her compensation for her share. The money didn't matter to him now. The main thing was that she was no longer a part of his life, either at home or at work. Sarah signed everything without complaint, apparently understanding her precarious position. Her lover, Alex, quit the company the very next day after that evening. Mark did not speak to him personally. There was no point. The young man himself realized that it was impossible for him to remain under the gaze of his superiors and colleagues. As expected, their romance quickly fizzled out. Their worlds and goals turned out to be too different. Without the secrecy and sharpness of mystery, their relationship quickly fizzled out. Alex, as he said, soon left San Francisco, returning to his parents in the South, and Sarah was left alone with her broken dreams. One day, while sorting through papers in his home office, Mark came across an old photograph. He and Sarah, still very young, were sitting on the garage floor among scattered circuit boards and laptops, laughing and hugging. Dust covered the glass, and Mark thoughtfully wiped it away with his sleeve. A lump rose in his throat. How everything had changed. Where was Sarah, who glowed with happiness next to him, proud of their every little success? Had she really disappeared, turning into a woman ready to trade their family for the glitter of parties and fleeting passion. He put the photo in a drawer. In the end, everyone makes their own choice of who they want to be. Sarah made hers and lost everything. A month after the divorce, Mark allowed himself his first long vacation. He flew to Europe for a few weeks, without a plan, alone. He needed to collect his thoughts and take a break from everything. The company was in good hands with top management for this time, and Dan promised to keep him informed. In Rome, he spent hours wandering among ancient ruins, reflecting on the transience of everything earthly. In Paris, he drank coffee in the mornings on the Seine embankment, watching the carefree passers-by. Slowly, Mark began to come to his senses. The pain of betrayal dulled, remaining a scar, but no longer a sharp wound. Sometimes he caught himself remembering not so much the moment of betrayal, but the best years with Sarah, the ones that were real. He did not want to erase them completely. They were an important part of his life. Yes, the end was bitter, but he was grateful for the good things they had. It was just that now that stage was over. He never saw Sarah again. Mutual friends said she had gone away for a while too, supposedly on a retreat in India, trying to find peace of mind. Mark didn't wish her any harm. Sometimes at night, when the loneliness was especially pressing, he wondered if their story might have turned out differently if he had paid more attention to her then, noticed the signs earlier, and tried to prevent the breakup. Perhaps. But it didn't matter anymore. What happened happened. On his first day back in San Francisco, Mark stopped by his parents' old house on the way from the airport, where it all began, that same garage. The house had long since been sold, but the garage was still there. Mark got out of the car and, apologizing to the new owner for disturbing him, walked to the garage. The doors were slightly open, bicycles and toolboxes were visible inside. Nothing reminded him of the days when their startup life was in full swing here. But Mark closed his eyes, and for a second it was as if he was there again. Young him and young Sarah, both covered in paint, sitting on the garage floor, laughing, making plans. He wiped away a tear and turned to leave. "Hey, buddy," his new mistress called out to him, softening. "I hope you found what you were looking for." Mark paused, thinking about her words. Had he found it? He had been looking for a ghost of the past, but had only met his present self, one who had survived the storm, but was ready to live on. "Yes," he replied, smiling slightly. "Thank you." The midday sun was shining brightly outside. Mark closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Life went on. He had work, friends, and who knows, maybe he would meet someone who would teach him to believe again. But now he would not rush headlong like a boy. What he had experienced had made him wiser. As he got into the car, he remembered the words he had once heard at one of those receptions. "The wave of success is dangerous. It's easy to lose your head on its crest." That's what happened to him and Sarah. Success had turned their heads in different ways, and they had crashed on the rocks on this wave. Mark started the engine. Before driving off, he looked at the familiar street once more. Goodbye, past. The story of Mark and Sarah ended sadly. What they had built together for years, trust, love, a common cause, was destroyed by the onslaught of temptation and lies. One wrong step, a fleeting passion, and everything collapsed like a house of cards. This can no longer be returned or fixed. But life goes on, and Mark knew that the crisis he had experienced would not break him completely. He would draw conclusions, heal his wounds, and move on. And this story would forever remain a lesson for him about how important it is to value what you have, and how fragile trust is between loved ones, and about how the thirst for novelty and instant temptation can destroy the most valuable thing that has been created over the years. A few weeks passed, and they stretched out like a gray fabric without a pattern. The papers were signed, the keys were returned, the passwords were changed. The silence between them became not a dramatic pause, but a new background to life. Silence returned to the house. At first it was oppressive. You could hear the refrigerator clicking and the palm leaves rubbing together by the window. Mark began waking up an hour earlier and doing things on a list, making the bed, airing out the rooms, making coffee, checking the mail. The rituals worked better than the drugs. He rearranged the furniture in the living room, took down their wedding photo from the wall, and replaced it with an empty frame. He was testing whether he could get used to the empty space before he decided what to fill it with. At work, for the first time in a long time, he delegated not out of fatigue, but out of conviction. He kept the strategy and product for himself, and gave operational issues to Dan and Liz. The team seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. There were fewer meetings, the meaning was clearer. One of his first orders was as dry as possible. An updated code of ethics, transparent rules for reporting conflicts of interest. Not revenge sanitation. He asked HR to add sessions with a psychotherapist to the insurance. This is not a weakness, it is a tool, he said in general. That day, for the first time, he looked people in the eye and said, "I went through a divorce," without a lump in his throat. Mark started walking in the evenings. Not running, but leisurely strolls along the Sobrado City waterfront and past the Ferry building. He deleted social media from his phone, leaving behind a jazz playlist and history podcasts. Sometimes he'd go into a small cookware store on Market Street and spend a long time looking at the pots, as if choosing not the metal, but a new role as the master of his own kitchen. He bought a cast iron skillet and learned how to scramble eggs just right, with the edges crispy and the yolk whole. On Saturdays, he started going to the farmer's market for peppers and ripe tomatoes. The freckled saleswoman quickly remembered him as the omelet guy. Friends invited him to baths, concerts, and the mountains. He often refused, but not always. He and Noah started a tradition of playing squash on Thursdays. Sweat poured out and his head cleared. Mark came to a psychologist a month after the divorce on his own initiative. At the first session, he spoke little and directly, "I don't want to get stuck." After several meetings, he learned to notice where he confused the past with the future and stopped trying to win conversations in his thoughts. The Europe he decided to go to was not an escape, but a pause. In Rome, he bought the same espresso every day from a silent barista and sat on the steps of the Pantheon while the square woke up. In Paris, he rented a room on the fifth floor without an elevator and realized that he missed the simplicity, carrying water by himself, washing t-shirts in the sink, reading a paper newspaper. In Lisbon, he learned not to rush up the stairs. "The world won't collapse if you walk slowly," he repeated to himself on the stairs of the Alfama. There, for the first time in a long time, he fell asleep with the window open and did not wake up at every rustle. When Mark returned, he collected a box of things in his office that remembered the two of them. A souvenir from Yosemite, a funny magnet with the word "Best Team," an old blanket. He didn't throw them out, but took them to storage. "I'm not ready to say goodbye, but I'm ready to put them out of sight," he told himself. The house stopped resembling an exhibition of incompatible memories and, for the first time, became a place where he could simply live. On Sundays, he called his parents; on Tuesdays, his mentor, who had once taught him a simple lesson: don't answer right away. More and more often, he didn't answer right away, and that made him sleep better. The work was going on. He still missed one big contract. He didn't have enough inner energy to finish it. But he didn't die either. The company got on its feet, and he's stronger. Over time, Mark began to meet people in the city who knew it and treated him calmly. Some patted him on the shoulder, some pretended not to notice. He maintained the level. He didn't make excuses or spread things around. 6 months later, he let guests into his house for the first time. A small dinner for four, pasta, wine, and simple conversations. And he laughed not loudly, not hysterically like a man who hears himself again. Before going to bed, he put a book on the nightstand instead of a phone. In the morning, he woke up without the feeling that he needed to fix something immediately. Sarah disappeared from his life, but she didn't vanish. In narrow circles, her name was still whispered for a while. She lived with a friend for the first few weeks, then rented a small one-room apartment in No Valley. White walls, wooden floors, a mattress on the floor, and an IKEA table. The neighbor upstairs played the guitar. The neighbor downstairs kept a cat that sat by her door in the morning and meowed. This was a new, unvarnished life. The trash wasn't taken out on time. The spices were in tiny jars. The pipes were too loud. In her case, the retreat in India turned out to be not an Instagram experience, but an unexpected test. No spectacular sunrises in the feed, early rises, silence, a hard bed, and notes to herself. Don't dramatize. Accept the consequences. Don't write to Mark. She cried not beautifully, not cleansingly, but in snatches between practices. When she returned, she took a therapist, and for the first time honestly said things that she had previously covered up with wit. The fear of remaining a secondary figure in someone else's life, greed for attention, fatigue from her own role as the life of the party. During one of the sessions, she heard herself say, "I am destroying what I feel like I am not the main one in," and she fell silent. This realization was difficult, but sobering. Sarah left work chats and those where they usually discussed who was with whom and where. She demonstratively skipped a few parties, then realized that she couldn't handle it. Instead, she signed up for a course in digital analytics, a boring and systematic business, far from sparkly. Working with her hands and head without fireworks turned out to be almost a cure. A couple of months later, she took on several small freelance projects, setting up funnels, writing reports, riding a scooter to visit clients in co-working spaces. She still had money savings plus dividends from her 5%, but for the first time she counted her expenses and discovered a strange pleasure in numbers. Sarah tried to talk to some people. She wrote to Liz briefly, "I'm sorry I put you in an awkward position. If you can, forgive me." Liz responded formally, but without venom. To two close friends, Sarah said bluntly, "I screwed up." One nodded and stayed, the other did not. Losses, too, became part of the new simplicity. She didn't turn to Mark, not out of pride, but out of respect for boundaries. Sometimes she thought of him early in the morning, when the light fell on the floor at the same angle as it once did in their house. At such moments, she wrote in a notebook, "Thank you for the years," and closed it. Her life was now separate, and the further it went, the clearer it became. Sarah began to cook also from lists, like Mark, although they didn't know it. She learned 2 soups, 3 salads, and 1 perfect cookie. On Sundays, she went to a women's shelter, helped with resumes and interviews, organized, printed, explained how to talk about failures. Sometimes, when she said, "I made a mistake, I learned my lesson," she heard her own story in it and didn't turn away. 6 months later, she sold some of her shares to avoid being dependent on dividends from one company and invested in her own small agency. 2 analysts, 1 part-time designer, no big slogans. The first client was a cafe on the next street. Sarah made them a simple CRM and a mailing campaign. For the first time in a long time, she was happy not about the likes, but about the fact that people in line actually had more orders. They rarely crossed paths. Once, Mark saw Sarah from afar at Tartine, laughing with an old acquaintance, holding a paper cup with both hands. He went outside, stood there, and returned for his pastry without disturbing anyone. Another time, Sarah spotted him on the dock, walking with Noah, arguing about something on his phone. She turned away, not out of bitterness, but to avoid disturbing his peace. These little scenes were not an escape, but a new politeness. One day, Mark finally took the empty frame down from the wall and hung a city map with walking routes marked with green post-it notes. Another day, Sarah threw out a box of glitter and feathers for parties. They both learned to clear out space not at the same time, but in sync, essentially. Time did not heal, it rebuilt everyday life. Mark increasingly put not only meetings on the calendar, but also nothing. An evening without plans when you can cook soup and watch a documentary. He began mentoring 2 young founders and for the first time felt how saying out loud helped him. Speed is not the only metric. Sarah launched a newsletter for small businesses about simple growth tools without promises of an explosion. Her letters were read because they were specific. When a mutual friend once suggested that they all meet together, close the gestalt, they both refused. Not out of stubbornness, but out of an understanding that nothing can be opened that has not already been opened. The closing took place that evening at the table, when facts were voiced, not accusations. Everything else is subsequent work by each of them on themselves. A year after the divorce, Mark traded in his car for a smaller one and kept only the things he actually used. His wardrobe began to include colors other than black and gray for the first time in a long time. He began saying maybe to dinner invitations with strangers. No rush, no saving grace. Sarah, meanwhile, moved into an apartment with a balcony and got into the habit of watering 5 potted plants every morning. Her agency was on its feet, and she had learned to say no to toxic projects and yes to those where the client was willing to listen. Their paths diverged, but they did not fall into the abyss. They learned to live not next to each other and not against each other, but simply separately, each with their own responsibilities, their own habits, their own pace. The story of falling became for them a story of how to rise, not dramatically, not beautifully, but consistently day after day. And there was neither triumph nor punishment in this. There was growing up. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.